Welcome to this Talks at Google virtual event. I'm Amanda Walker, and I'm on the Privacy, Safety, and Security team here at Google. Before I get started, I want to remind everyone that we will be taking questions towards the end of this talk. As you think of questions throughout this conversation, please add them to the live chat on the right. We'll get to them at the end of the talk. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Amy Schneider. Amy is an American software engineer and recent Jeopardy champion. Following an impressive 40-game winning streak, she became the most successful woman ever to compete on Jeopardy. She's the second all-time in the show's history, trailing only Ken Jennings. Amy is also the first openly transgender contestant to qualify for the Tournament of Champions. She's been covered in People, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, USA Today, and more, and has appeared on Good Morning America, and now here at Talks at Google. Most recently, she's written a book called In the Form of a Question, The Joys and Rewards of a Curious Life. And Amy, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Talks at Google.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome. As I read through your book, a lot of things resonated, so I will pick a few things that hopefully will be an interesting way to kick off conversation.
Right.
Your chapter on what it's like to have ADD was eerily familiar. I really liked your point that it's part of what you made you so good at Jeopardy. Can you talk a little bit about that and how this was a strength?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that, when people are asking me about how did I know all this stuff, basically, that's one of the big reasons is just that I've always gotten bored easily. And so one of the ways that I've always, dealt with that is by, learning and reading and thinking about stuff. And ever since Wikipedia existed, spending a lot of time, going down rabbit holes on Wikipedia. And so, that's definitely been, that's where a lot of this random facts that I'm able to pull for Jeopardy came from. And I think, it's also it's very specifically a Jeopardy skill because Jeopardy wants you to know a little about a lot of things and not a lot about any one thing, that's when ADD can not necessarily be as helpful if you really need to know something in depth. But knowing the surface level of a lot of things, that's what I'm good at.
Yeah, along the same lines, I found in my early career as a Mac programmer where you had to measure, not quite memorize, but know where to find stuff in 6 volumes of documentation, that having that kind of memory of, I remember reading about this, it was over here, let me go find it, was a real advantage. Did you find that having this kind of memory for trivia helped you as an engineer as well?
I think so. I think that, it's funny, that particular type of memory of filing things under I know where to find that, that's definitely helpful as an engineer, kind of sort of just storing pointers rather than full data sets in there. That's less helpful on Jeopardy. You've got to you can't just ring in and be like, I know where to look that up.
I know where to find that. Yeah, I'd be terrible at Jeopardy because of that. About a third of the way into the book, you described a day last December where you realized that testifying and partying are part of the same job. Can you tell us a little about what that day was like and what prompted that kind of realization?
Yeah, the job in question, as I often describe it, is famous celebrity trans person. And, I was in New York to attend the Out 100 gala, which was, something very cool and very exciting. But while I was getting ready for the trip, I heard from somebody that I knew in high school. And they were asking if I could come back to Ohio, where I grew up, and testify in Columbus against a bill that was banning gender affirming care for minors. And, it was something I'd been resisting a little bit doing anything kind of that overtly political because, when I became famous, I was expecting to become the target of a lot of attacks, and it hadn't happened yet. And so I was always kind of worried about, doing the thing that would, get, trigger.
When was the next shoe going to drop kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. And this seemed like it might be the sort of thing that would do that. But then, I was weighing it in my mind, and I was like, well, you know what's worse than having a bunch of people yelling at me on the internet would be a trans kid getting their healthcare taken away. And so I was like, well, I have to do it. So I flew into Columbus, and then, it was a very strange feeling there because, the people that had invited me, the people that were, there to testify along with me, were people who were in Ohio on the ground doing this work in a hostile environment, whether working for politicians, whether working for, nonprofits and things like that. And I felt like, kind of a fraud because I'm in the Bay Area. I honestly, by trans people standards, I don't have that many problems, and I was only there because I just won $1 million, but they assured me there, and then at the Out 100 gala, talking to another of the recipients, said basically the same thing, which was that, we don't need, this movement needs a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. I'm not doing that work on the ground, but I can bring attention to that hearing that they couldn't possibly get. Like, I got media attention to this bill that, 1,000 NGO nonprofit press releases would never have gotten. And at the same time, like, doing the celebrity stuff is also part of normalizing trans people, like going out there, being successful, going to fancy parties and getting swag bags and things like that. It's certainly.
I'm kind of curious, what did they have in the swag bag?
I don't remember. The one thing I remember is that you could get a champagne flute personalized with your name. They would like etch it while you were there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which I'm not sure if I did because I wasn't sure how I was going to get it home. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly a very enjoyable way of advocating for trans people and that sort of thing. But it is meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Well, as somebody who grew up in Ohio, in Cleveland, my case, I understand it can be challenging. There are a lot of good people doing a lot of good work. But it isn't quite like the Bay Area or the East Coast.
It isn't quite. And it's really sad to me that it's gotten, Ohio as a whole has gotten worse since, I moved away in 2009. And I've seen it kind of move backwards in terms of tolerance and acceptance. But, that's the way it goes. There's ebbs and flows in these things.
Yeah, the pendulum swings.
Yeah.
Speaking of parties, you described a party before you really came out as trans, which also resonated with me. You said you go through this some in the book about deciding sort of how to present yourself at this, and realized that needing to present yourself honestly overcame your fear of rejection. Even if it went horribly, it was still worth it to drop the mask. And then the party went fine.
Yeah.
How was that as a turning point? It sounded very significant from your description of that. I'm curious what that was like to go through.
It was significant. I mean, I think that, the process of transition has a lot of turning points in it, but that was definitely one of the bigger ones. I think that, transitioning is a scary thing, even apart from any sort of like political context or anything like that. But, you're sort of asking, in a way, it threatens every single relationship in your life. You're like, I'm asking you to accept me as a totally different person in a sense.
Yeah.
And
I'm not who you're saying to everyone, I'm not who you thought I was. And that's really hard.
Yeah. And it's definitely frightening. And, so I definitely, there was, I don't know, it was a few months, but it felt like forever, where I had like fully understood that I was trans, but didn't really believe that I would ever come out. Like, that it just felt like something I was always going to have to hide because I couldn't, I was so afraid of that rejection. I mean, and I'd also like was not that far removed from a divorce, and, which had also upended my relationships, and it just all felt too high stakes. But yeah, like, as you say, that pressure becomes irresistible to like you say, to drop the mask and to put yourself out there. And I think that it is true of many, many trans people, perhaps not all, but that far fewer people are upset than you expect to be. Like, people don't care about you, that your life that much. People are willing to accept you. Like, just take your word on things. It's you're the star of your own life, but everybody else is the star of theirs, and they're willing to, they will just accept it and be fine with it and move on far more often than I certainly expected.
One thing I remember from my own transition and when I came out back in the 80s, is I got a number of very heartwarming responses, and several that were saying basically, "Oh, that explains a bunch of things." Did you have, when you did eventually, come out more explicitly than this party, did you get that kind of reaction? Did you get that, "Oh, okay, that makes the puzzle pieces fit back together," or?
Yeah, no, I definitely got a few of those. It's funny, like in ways that, that surprised me. I was like, I thought I was doing such a good job,
We don't always do as well as we think we are.
Yeah. Well, and it was funny. One of the ones that kind of hit me was my brother, who he was saying that, he was surprised by it, but he said that as he was thinking about it, he remembered all through our childhoods that every time my mom tried to take me shopping for clothes, it was a huge fight. And I had completely, like, as soon as he said that, I was like, oh yeah, it really was. But like, that hadn't occurred to me as something that was why, because I hated every article of clothing that was available to me. I thought was ugly and didn't want it. So yeah, I think that it was interesting having other people see, sort of signs that I had missed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me it was cutting my hair, and I still keep it long, sort of in rebellion all these years later. Sort of along the same lines of getting a better reaction than you expected. You talk a little bit about the anti-trans sentiment around bathrooms and locker rooms that have been much in the news, regrettably, over the last few years. And I really liked your observation that it's only difficult if you decide to be difficult about it. That definitely matches my own experience. Did you notice any shift in that attitude between being kind of anonymous and being on Jeopardy and thrust in the limelight, where people do recognize you, I assume?
Yeah, I haven't really. I have, and it's, I mean, to be honest, I, have not traveled to any, I have not, as I sort of say, is like, I kind of avoid traveling to the Confederacy, and things like that. So that's probably to some extent part of that. But I think that, the controversy around bathrooms is an easy case to make for people who have never come across a trans person and don't, like, it's on the face of it, people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense, like the women's room is for women and all that sort of thing. But it actually, in practice, like, nobody who's going to very few people going to the bathroom are scrutinizing everyone else in the bathroom to think, are you secretly the wrong, the right?
Not that I've ever found, yes.
Yeah, like, people just aren't.
Other things on people's minds, yeah, at that point.
Yeah, people are not deputizing themselves into the bathroom police very often.
Well, I will defend a small corner of the Confederacy. Northern Virginia is actually pretty good.
Oh yeah, for sure.
This is where I am, but it's a little blue corner of a red state. So, let's see. Going back to Jeopardy again, you wrote some interesting things about how to decide how to shape your voice for the show, and decisions you made around that. Can you talk about that and whether it worked out the way you expected? I mean, as everybody can hear, I don't put huge effort into shaping my voice as well. So that part resonated a lot. Talk about that some.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, my voice was one of the things by the time I'd gotten through a lot of dysphoric feelings by the time I was willing to go on Jeopardy, but my voice was something that I still struggled with. I mean, if nothing else, it's just, hearing Sir on the phone a lot
Oh yeah,
is, is just,
it
is
gets
just what it
me.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while it's, certainly, I know that I could have if I'd been willing to put the work in, you know, I could have done the work to be able to speak in a more passively feminine voice. I had gotten some, vocal retraining therapy, and I knew that like when I really, like focused on it, that I could do it.
Mhm.
And so I was planning to do that on Jeopardy because, I didn't, because I had that dysphoria and I didn't, I knew that I was going to have professional hair and makeup done and nice clothes and everything like that. So the voice was the one thing I was worried about. But, it ultimately, and I didn't decide this until the day of taping, but it just started to feel wrong to do that.
Okay.
In kind of the same way that it, turned me off of doing the vocal retraining therapy in the first place. It
Hmm.
just felt like playing a character. Like I could do it like when I was practicing it as a skill, but like to do it in conversation with my friends just felt like distancing.
Mhm.
And so I didn't, and so I didn't want that. I was really trying to concentrate on being myself on Jeopardy, because if I was playing a character, then that's something that I could fail at. But if I'm just being myself, then it is what it is, and people will like it or not like it. But I won't have to beat myself up about it in the same way. And so that was sort of why I did it. Kind of just like I don't want to have this added thing, like just talk how I talk and focus on the clues and get the answers right and all of that. But then it was like after the fact, there were some surprises about how that worked out for me. The first one was, it was a real like stress test for that dysphoria. I watched myself on TV,
Yeah.
every night for a couple months. And the first few nights, it was tough on me. I didn't like it. It was unpleasant, but I sort of, I got used to it, and it stopped being something that I noticed. And moreover, like nobody seemed to be like making fun of me on the internet or anything, or commenting on, and so I was just like, wow, I guess this isn't the huge thing that it's always felt like to me. And so I wasn't expecting this to like massively reduce my dysphoria around that, but it did. And then the other thing that I hadn't thought about at the time, but well, I mean, I hadn't known that I was going to go win 40 games, obviously. You can't expect that. Um, and so, once I knew that I was going to be, a famous trans person. It's going to get a lot of attention, and my identity was going to be part of that.
Yeah.
And so, I know that like both of us, I would say probably the majority of trans women, don't massively shape their voice in that way. And I'm glad that I can be a representative of that, that section of trans people, and help other, so in the same way that it reduced my vocal dysphoria, I hope that it could do the same for others.
I hope so too. I remember having friends ping me while you were on this run going, have you been watching Jeopardy? No, no, not for years. Why? Oh, there's this wonderful
Yeah,
woman on Jeopardy. She's on a roll. And
yeah.
one of the
No,
things that's, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, it's funny, people who watch Jeopardy think that everybody watches Jeopardy, and that's
Yeah.
not true.
So I got a quick reintroduction to Jeopardy after my college years. But one of the remarks that several people made to me was that they were impressed at the authenticity you projected, through a lot of different cues, and that they really respected that. And I found that heartwarming, because that's not the reaction you see caricatured in the press around what trans people are like. And so good on you for showing that to a national audience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that like, anybody, the characters that are out there, like, they just don't withstand contact with an actual trans person because we're all just people. It's something I talk about somewhere, but like, most of the time I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm trans.
Yeah.
It's not like
I'm
I'm
going to
not
get
out
my
there.
groceries, or I'm going to get my
Right.
hair trimmed, or things like that.
Yeah, I'm not, being a trans person getting my groceries. I'm just getting my groceries and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, and like I say, I was trying to be as authentic as I could. I mean, it's the best version of my authenticity, but still,
It's TV. Yeah.
yeah, it's TV. And so yeah, I think that. And so it had a much bigger effect than I really thought. And I realized how many people have these negative stereotypes and caricatures of trans people only because they were raised with them the same way I was, the same way I assume you were, and just never reconsidered them. And so the anti-trans feeling is broader than I wish it was, but it's also more brittle than I think people realize it is.
I certainly hope so, and I have seen evidence of that too. Let's see. You spend an interesting this. I have to admit, this is one of the areas that did not resonate with me, or with my own experience anyway. But I found it fascinating. You spend a chapter talking about drug use, and what struck me as I read between the lines of that is you seem to have approached drugs as tools rather than pure recreation or escape. Did I read between the lines correctly there? And if so, can you talk a little bit about that?
No, I mean, I think you did. I mean, it's not that, like, not that I've never used them for recreation or escape, but yeah, I think that I've always found them just kind of fascinating, and the way that they make my brain work differently. And so and I enjoy that. I find that, which I think, everybody knows that, alcohol, it makes you less inhibited. And that can be, there are times when it is valuable to be less inhibited. Like marijuana, like, I think makes my brain form more connections. I think that I remember a writing professor in college saying that, like, oh, it's people are like, oh, they get high and they think they've got all the, and then they look at it in the morning and it's like, oh, this is shit. And I agree that you can't write a full draft while you're high, but you can come up with ideas and concepts that then when sober, you can, like, actually, make coherent and communicate to other people. And yeah, and so I think that that's always been for me a big part of it, is just giving my, they do feel like tools in a toolkit, and like just being able to turn on different settings in my brain for different situations.
Okay. Let's see. You went into a description of how your relationship with Genevieve developed, especially sort of on the echoing what I brought up earlier. He said everyone that knew us had been right. We were a couple. We had just been the last people to find out. How did you find, after transition, how did you find that affected how you were forming bonds with people, how your relationships developed? I mean, I don't want to really focus on someone who's not here in this talk, but can you talk about, how that went differently for you? And
yeah, I think that, I think that, well, I don't know. I mean, I think that, it's sort of like, it's a lot of, like, lesbian cliches in a lot of ways, which
most cliches have a little element of truth.
For sure. But that's sort of like, like, I mean, I think that, women form intense friendships in a way that to me feels different than men do. And so when there's that like romantic feeling there, it can be hard to distinguish from the feelings you have for your close friends. And so I think that was certainly a factor in it taking us so long to figure out that we were a couple. and I think that like it wasn't just, I wasn't just in kind of a new place as a, kind of dating for the first time as a woman. But she had not really, fully come to terms with her own sexuality either. She had, she went to a college that had been a all women's college until recently. And, so there were a lot of like extremely gay women there. And she sort of felt like, well, I guess that's not me. And she didn't want to, sort of just like, she didn't want to feel like she was just saying she was gay to be cool or something like that, And so, she kind of like introduced herself to me as straight. And so I was just like, oh, well, whatever. I just have a crush on someone who is unavailable. This is not the story of my entire life. All right. So yeah, I think that like for both of us, navigating our sort of our both gender and sexuality, I think that, we both really, learn things about ourselves from each other.
Okay. That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Let's switch subjects
Sure.
greatly here. Let's talk about Oakland for a minute.
All right.
I grew up in the Rust Belt in Cleveland, and I visited the Bay Area a lot for years. I've always worked in high tech, and so I've worked there. I've lived there for a couple of years, and honestly, I find Oakland the best part of the Bay Area. It feels the most homey to me as someone from the Rust Belt. Lots of diversity on different axes, food available 24 hours a day, all sorts of things like that you just don't find on the peninsula or elsewhere. What parts of the city called out most to you, and what made it home? You've clearly made this your new home. And,
absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of it is just sort of, a vibe thing that's hard to communicate. I sort of, my answer is to people that ask that is like, I don't know, move to Oakland, you'll find out, like, but I think certainly, as you say, the diversity is a huge part of it. And in particular, the feeling of white people being, obviously, like white supremacist country in Oakland as elsewhere, but relative to most places in the country being one of the groups in this city, and that on a closer to peer setting than most places in America. And that's something I appreciate. I mean, I think again, this sort of like curiosity about the world, living in Oakland gives me an opportunity to, at second hand, but see how many different types of people live, how they react to things, how, be exposed to so many different points of view that I could never get, in Marin or in Ohio or things like that. And the weather is amazing. So that's good too.
I do envy that. Here in the Mid-Atlantic, whenever it's the cold of winter, it's like, I should go visit California.
Yeah.
Get a break from it.
Yeah. No, I moved away from Ohio, and so many people were like, oh, you're going to miss the seasons. And no, it turns out I just like it being nice all the time. I don't understand the other side of that.
I missed snow a little bit when I was out there, but as everyone pointed out, well, you can drive to snow. So
yeah.
Let's see. You have a really engaging writing style, I have to say.
Thank you.
The ADD shows through a little bit. Each chapter is very different from the one before it. I had no trouble following this, probably because my brain's wired for that as well. But what was the experience of writing the book like? And have you caught the writing bug? Are there more stories you want to put down onto paper?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's stuff I tried to get into this book and I couldn't make work. And there's, like I've got a whole notes app with, just as next book stuff. So, I'm definitely hoping that this one does well enough that I get another book deal. As far as the process of writing it, yes, as you say, it was written as a bunch of independent pieces because that was the only way I could, approach it and not be overwhelmed. So, one of the people I was working with said it's think of it as like a mixtape, which I think is
Okay.
pretty reasonable. Yeah, I mean, the writing process, so when I was writing the pitch, which it turns out I didn't know how this all works, but a pitch winds up being about like 30, 40 pages of material. And writing that went really smoothly, and it just was like flowing out of me and all of that sort of thing. And I was like, great, this book will be no problem. And then as soon as I'd signed the book deal, and all of a sudden this was going to be printed on paper and sent all over the country, yeah, it became a lot more stressful. And combining that with the fact that I was also just incredibly, busier than I'd been for years in my life. So when I wanted to procrastinate on the book, there was always like things that I legitimately did need to be doing that just so I could put off the writing till tomorrow. So yeah, I mean, I did like, I say that I really enjoyed writing the book, and it's true, but anyone who knew me during the year I was writing that book would, perhaps raise a skeptical eyebrow because I was constantly complaining about writing the book. But I think that, and then like, and getting it finished too. And like when I was finally done with all the edits and everything, and I was looking over it, like for the first few weeks after that, I was just all I could think about was the shortcomings of things I hadn't got in. Like I'd just be looking at every page, like, that sentence isn't quite right, and all that sort of thing. But I eventually got past that and could look at it and be like, okay, this is something I'm okay with this. I'm proud of it. I do think I can do better, but that's fine. It's my first book. In theory, this should be my worst. If I'm writing more than one, the first one should be the worst. I should get better, and I will. But the one thing that I was confident about from the beginning and never lost faith in was that I know what my voice sounds like. I knew that I was able to have a consistent kind of tone and style. And so that was the thing that I could always hold on to as I was sinking into doubt about everything else.
Well, that tone comes through very clearly. You have a very clear voice in writing, which not everyone does. So I look forward to reading more things. If you have more books in you waiting to come out, I really look forward to that. Actually, since this is a talk at Google, I think I'm obligated to ask a question here, which is, do you plan to go back to software engineering? Has this, being a famous trans person and author and Jeopardy winner, sort of taken over your life?
I mean, this is a lot more fun than engineering, I have to say. And
okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
That's true. And I mean, I think, it's not something that I'm ruling out by any means. We'll see how things go. But you had asked earlier, like about, ADD being helpful for being an engineer. And, part of my answer to that is it was until it wasn't. As long as I found it interesting, then it was, great. And then in the last sort of couple of years before Jeopardy, I had kind of stopped caring about computers and what they did, and so it was getting really hard to stay engaged. So yeah, I mean, I think that, I enjoyed it for so long, and there is something, I'm actually planning to write about it more in my next book. And, I could see myself like getting a revived interest and going back to it at some point. But at the moment, that doesn't feel like something I want to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, certainly ride this wave as long as it lasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've got some questions from the audience stacking up. So let's go to moderation. Okay. Maddie Sullivan asks, what are the best ways to learn new things or find new things to explore?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's, it has to be enjoyable for you. It has to be things that you are naturally interested in. I think that, that's something that I feel like a lot of people when they're asking me about Jeopardy specifically, like, are thinking about it as like, cramming for finals or something. And I'm like, I don't recommend approaching Jeopardy like studying, because if you're not enjoying it, you won't do it as much. And, and it's fine when you're doing it for finals because like the grade really matters or whatever, but like Jeopardy is just Jeopardy, and learning for your own pleasure should always just be pleasure. You don't know what practical use any of it will ever be. So if you're not enjoying it, then what's the point? But I think, the key then is, how do you broaden, out of that, right? And get to other things. And so that's where it's just sort of about looking for those opportunities to branch out. Like, take the thing that you enjoy and really dig into it. And if you really start to, examine it closely, you're going to find questions that you didn't realize you had kind of at the surface, that are going to take you into other areas. I think that one of the best things for me has been developing an interest in history. Like over the, like a few years after college, I just found myself reading more and more history, because history ties into everything else. And it is, it's so fractal. Looking at history at different time scales, teaches you different things. And then it ties into science and history and religion and everything else. So that's been probably the best way that I've kind of learned new things, is by starting with history and then, asking him, finding all the questions that are prompts in my mind and going to try to find the answers and following them out.
Fascinating. I'm another history buff. So that could be a whole other conversation. Let's see. What's the next question we have here? Farah asks, what was the most interesting or surprising fact you learned as you prepared for Jeopardy?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think, I don't know. I think I learned, I was interested to learn about opera, which was something that I didn't really know anything about. And, it comes up often enough on Jeopardy that you've got to kind of got to know the surface level of it. And just sort of like, and it's something I knew intellectually, but like just sort of how popular it was, what a mass market art form it was, looking at like Mozart, like some of his works were, sort of for the nobility, and some of them were kind of more for the general populace and things like that. And then thinking through that, thinking about how different the world was and before recorded music. I saw something somewhere saying that like, if aliens were examining us, they would think that music was one of the, requirements for human life, because it's everywhere. It's all around us all the time. And, I was so unconscious of that, but then like going to an opera would be, such an amazing opportunity if you could never listen to, music that wasn't being made right in front of you. So that was, it wasn't so much a fact, just like, just giving me a new perspective into, past societies.
So it sounds like you went from I should get a surface knowledge of opera, and then dove deep.
I mean, yeah. And that's, I think that's the thing too, is about learning is, it's not about learning facts. It's about like, learning ideas and concepts and sort of like worldviews almost.
Okay. Next question. Molly asks, what are your thoughts on how society and or institutions like Google can help trans folks, even if not strictly famous ones, carry over achievements without causing dysphoria, like dead naming and things like that?
I think that, it's a thing I think about, if I'm reading this correctly, a year or two ago, I was cleaning out my mother's attic, and found a bunch of like boxes with all my spelling bee trophies and all these sorts of things. And all this stuff, and obviously all of it had my dead name on it. And it was sort of a weird experience. But I think that it's part of the issue with that question is I do think it changes. It has changed for me over the course of my transition. It doesn't, I'm comfortable with the fact that that used to be my name. And I wasn't at first, and I hated to see it. I hated, I hated checking the mail. I have my wife check the mail for me because it just like was it bothered me every time I saw my dead name. And that's kind of changed over time. So, in that sense, the answer that works for me isn't, the same as the answer that would work for everybody else. But I think, the main thing is I think for the most part, like if we're not talking about physical, if we're not talking about a plaque that's, from my spelling bee in 1990 or whatever, then, these records can be changed. This is the whole magic of computers, is that, we can make those changes retroactively. So, I mean, yeah, it's not something that I've actually like thought about in that context before. It's an interesting question.
All right. So we've got a few questions left. Were there any questions? Jana asks, were there any questions on Jeopardy that you are surprised you answered correctly? And so which ones?
Yeah, there definitely are. I'm trying to see if I can remember one real quick, but it was, and that's one of the things about Jeopardy is like one of the challenges of it is figuring out when to ring in when you don't necessarily have the answer yet. Because, it's if you don't, like, you've got to decide right away and ring in because it's moving so fast. And I know there were times when I rang in because like the answer came into my mind with no supporting documentation, no idea where I had heard it, but it just sounded right. And so I rang in and said it. And it wasn't always correct, but most of the time it was. And I started to learn to trust that. Yeah, I wish I could come up with an example right now, but like, they all blur together. But it was a weird feeling being like, like people ask me, how do you know that? And some of the times the answer is, I genuinely don't know how I knew that answer.
Actually, one of the things that I remember reading in the book was another thing you said was a strength was just the ability to buzz in quickly or to ring in quickly. Do you think that's connected to this? I know it, but I don't know how, or?
I honestly, that one I have no idea. Okay, it is, yeah, like I it's something that I turned out to be, good at. And there's no way of knowing until you get there. Certainly I did like practice just to get in the habit of trying to get that timing right at home, but you don't know because the issue is if you ring in too early, then you get, then your buzzer gets delayed and the other people get a chance to ring in ahead of you. So you've got to get it, not as soon as you know it, but like right at just the right moment. And it's a really important skill on Jeopardy. And it's as far as I can tell, is kind of a crapshoot. You show up and either you find that timing or you don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question. Tom Burnham asks, what would your dream Jeopardy category be? Where's your knowledge sweet spot?
Well, I was actually did a podcast where they asked me to name a category for them. And I gave them a few. One of them was the television show Daria, and the book Moby Dick. And and I forget what the third one I gave them was, but like those are probably the two, at least in terms of I guess, well, I'll call Moby Dick pop culture, I suppose. But those are narrative works that I have engaged with very deeply. So yeah, definitely those would be up there.
All right. Let's see. I don't have any more questions. Yana has another one. Did you make a curriculum for yourself to prepare for Jeopardy, and how did you approach that syllabus?
Yeah, so the main way I was preparing for Jeopardy was going through jarchive.com that has all the clues and answers from the show's entire history. And again, it was like over a decade of trying out. So for most of that time, I would generally just have like a browser tab on my phone open to that site and just go through it when I was on BART or, whatever else. And so then like I did develop a curriculum out of that because I would, find things that I was consistently missing. For example, I could never remember which Bronte sister was which. So I had to like finally figure out how to get that to stick in my head. Or, like I say, I didn't know much about opera. So I had to go, give myself a opera 101 course and things like that. So it was just sort of shaped by what I was noticing as I went through the J archive, but that was the main framework for it.
Okay. I think we have at least one more, and then we will wrap it up because we're looking at the time.
All right.
Oh, no, there is no more questions. All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Please, everybody, give a virtual round of applause for Amy. The book, again, is in the form of a question, The Joys and Rewards of a Curious Life. It's a wonderful read. And Amy, thank you so much for coming to Talks at Google.
Oh, yeah. I mean, thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone watching for tuning in and asking questions. Please come back for other Talks at Google.